Hi, everyone. Judge Andrew Napolitano here for Judging Freedom. Today is Monday, December 4th, 2023. Larry Johnson joins us now in the wee hours from Moscow. Larry, a pleasure, my dear friend. Thank you for taking the time in your important trip there to join us. There's a little bit of a delay in our communication, I guess maybe because it's nighttime in Moscow, I'm not sure, but these things happen every once in a while. I don't know if you saw this because of your. I don't know if you saw.
The gerbils are tired.
Okay, I don't know if you saw this because of your travels, but there's a long piece in the Washington Post arguing that miscalculations between Kyiv and Washington, divisions between Kyiv and Washington, are at the root of the failure of the spring offensive by Ukraine. Now, this has all the earmarks of the CIA trying to make the DOD look bad, but just we're curious as to your take on this, on the reality of the miscalculations, and if it's not reality, why would the CIA be going after the DOD at a time like this?
Well, people do not appreciate how big Ukraine is, how big Russia is, and the fact that Russia has been very effective in countering the moves by NATO, by the United States, to try to defeat Russia. And so it's just, this is just, common sense is finally catching up, because Ukraine, there's nothing that Ukraine could have done that would have changed the outcome. That's what's so absurd about the United States. They fail to perceive what Russia is. Russia is not some sort of backward little Abner society of, they're living in a corn patch. It is a massive, modern society, and unlike the United States, has its industrial capability intact. And so therefore, it can produce what it needs in order to fight a war in Ukraine. The United States doesn't. In fact, the United States has demonstrated that we cannot even produce enough missiles or enough rockets or enough artillery shells in any 1 month to keep Ukraine in the fight. So it's the delusion on this is amazing. It's remarkable.
Are you aware of divisions between the DOD and Kyiv, or is this CIA propaganda to prepare the West for the collapse of Ukraine and induce the West to believe that it's not the intelligence community's fault?
Yeah, no, there's a clear disconnect between what the Department of Defense wants, between what the CIA is saying can be accomplished, and between what Ukraine can actually do on the battlefield. Russia has developed enhanced capabilities with drones to the extent that they can now attack on a personal basis entrenched Ukrainian fighters. In the past, they might have had to use troop assaults, guys running across the ground. They don't have to do that now. So Ukraine is in a very precarious position, and there's nothing that the United States can do to change the situation. So we need to stop lying to ourselves and admit that Ukraine's ability to stay in this war is ended.
Is that because of Hamas and Israel, or is it because of the power, size, and discipline of the Russian military as compared to the Ukraine military?
Well, I think it's both. It's a combination of both. One, the distraction that Israel has provided, where the United States is having to focus all of its military support towards Israel, has taken away from Ukraine. But the reality is, people do not appreciate the size of Russia. They keep pretending that Russia is some sort of backward country with just a few thousand shacks put together. No, it's a massive place. We have talked in the past about drone strikes here in Russia. The drone strikes came in on one building. Imagine that drone strikes hit one building inside of Manhattan. Manhattan is a massive place. Moscow is twice the size of Manhattan. It is meaningless. And that's the thing that Americans need to grasp, that Russia is not, Russia really has been fighting with one arm behind its back. There is no way that Ukraine will win this.
If I hadn't told you who said this, you might not know it. Wars develop in phases. We have to support Ukraine in both good and bad times. We should be prepared for bad news. Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg. Now, what would have possessed him to say publicly on Saturday, 2 days ago, we should be prepared for bad news, Larry?
Hey, thank God they don't require drug tests for Stoltenberg. He would have been high on marijuana before. Because, look, at least he's finally recognizing what the reality of the situation is. The Russian military is in control of the battlefield. Ukraine, it doesn't matter what they do. They don't have the troops. They don't have the weapons. They do not have the initiative in order to defeat Russia. And so the reality is Russia is going to crush Ukraine over the course of the next 2 months. And there's not a thing that the United States or NATO can do to stop it. If we indulge these fantasies that, Ukraine's still in the fight. Judge, for God's sake, they're putting pregnant women on the front lines. When you have to resort to putting pregnant women into your defensive positions, that is a sign from God that you're losing.
There's also a sign coming from Washington, D.C., and that is that the Speaker of the House of Representatives, Mike Johnson, a person we never heard of before a month or two ago, though a fierce opponent of aid to Ukraine when he was simply Congressman Mike Johnson, now that he's Speaker of the House, wants the House seriously to consider Joe Biden's request for another $68 billion in aid to Ukraine. Now, you talk about throwing good money after bad. It would be unconscionable if the Congress did this. I expect the Senate to do it, but I did not expect the Republican-controlled House to do it, and they may still block it, but with the Speaker in favor of it, we know it's going to come to the floor, and we know there are big government types in both parties. So what will Zelensky and Zelensky do with $68 billion besides steal whatever they can?
Well, let me first say, Mike Johnson is no relative. We're not related.
Okay, but glad to hear it.
no matter what the Congress does, that money's not going to immediately flow to Ukraine. It is going to U.S. defense contractors. It's going to enrich the jobs in the districts of congressmen who are voting for this. But it does not mean that actually that aid is going to arrive in Ukraine physically. So it really, it does not change the tactical situation for the Ukrainians. It actually means they're in a more dire position. So yes, the Congress is going to act, is going to provide funding that's going to make its way into the districts of members of Congress. It's going to provide jobs for Americans, but it's not going to change the situation on the ground in Ukraine.
Switching gears to Gaza and Israel, our friend, your compadre, Ray McGovern, and our friend Alistair Crook both reported on this program earlier today that not only has the fighting resumed ferociously since in Gaza since the conclusion of the truce, but it's even more ferocious, and that the Israelis have lost at least 60 troops in an ambush set up by Hamas, for which the Israeli Defense Forces fell into. So does the government of Prime Minister Netanyahu still plan to wipe the Palestinians off the planet? And does that government understand the harm to Israel of this ferocious assault on civilians?
Yeah. So Israel is stating that as its policy. That's true. But they do not have the ability to execute it. And so what we have seen is that Hamas has effectively attacked Israeli forces. And they're going to suffer casualties that, frankly, Israel cannot sustain. They will recognize that they're not willing to lose this number of troops in a face-to-face battle with Ukraine. Not Ukraine, with Hamas. And, you know, it's sad because, you know, there are soldiers dying on both sides. But the Israelis are suffering casualties they cannot sustain. That's the point. That
and Larry,
Israel
there's
has a low tolerance.
There's no mention in the Western press of these casualties. McGovern and Crook's sources are people in Israel and in the Israeli press, but you don't see this in the New York Times or the Washington Post or the Wall Street Journal or Fox News or any of the mainstream media around here.
Right. No, you know, this is part of that information warfare. You know, as long as you don't report it, it doesn't happen. But the reality is it's happening. And Hamas, in this 2-week peace process with this ceasefire, you know, they prepared ambushes. They've killed Israeli soldiers going into the tunnels. They have prepared ambushes above ground. Israel is suffering significant losses. And what's horrific about this is that Israel is killing Palestinian civilians without regard for the fact that it's killing civilians. They're justifying it that, well, we're killing Hamas fighters. And yet, in none of these videos are we seeing bodies being drug out where a guy is hanging on to a gun, hanging on to a anti-tank guided missile. We're not seeing that. We're seeing babies, we're seeing women, we're seeing toddlers. And those images are resonating over the internet, over Telegram, over the social media channels. It's enraging the world. And Israel, no matter what it says, is losing the propaganda battle in this regard.
Here's Alistair this morning on Judging Freedom talking about Hamas killing IDF soldiers.
And at the same time, we've seen increase of attacks by Hamas on the Israelis. 60 Israelis have died in an ambush. I'm not sure that it's exactly 60, but it's certainly round about 60. It's reported in the Israeli press that it's 60.
Is that a significant number, Alistair? 60 Israeli soldiers killed in an ambush?
In one incident, yes. 60 is quite big for one incident. They put bombs all around, and the Israelis walked into it, and then they finished them off with automatic rifle fire. But there've been others. The Israelis have been killed in tunnels. They've laid traps, taken them into tunnels, and then collapsed the tunnels on them. And in the north, there's been heavy fighting.
Have you read that in any newspapers, Larry?
Yeah. Alistair is, he really is an extraordinary person, and his wife, Ashlyn. He is a gentleman, but he is an intelligence professional. He's not fabricating facts. He does not have an intent to try to create a narrative just to serve some sort of ulterior motive. Alistair is a man of great integrity. And when he tells you these things, he is speaking truth. And, the fact of the matter is, Israel's taking casualties. And they're loath to admit it because it affects their political support at home. It affects their ability to continue these kinds of missions. And what Israel is doing right now is they're saying one thing publicly, but their intent is to try to force every Palestinian to flee Gaza. And to do that, they're willing to kill as many civilians as necessary.
And what is Joe Biden going to do about this? Because on one hand, we're shipping, thousands of pounds of bombs to them. On the other hand, Blinken is saying, well, you have all these bombs, but don't use them.
Yeah, no, he's schizophrenic. They're admitting that this is wrong, that Israel can't continue this, but they're not cutting them off. The United States has the ability to nip this in the bud. We'll simply tell Israel, if you keep this up, we're not sending you another tranche of weapons. You're on your own. They won't do that because with the AIPAC. Go ahead.
Here's Max Blumenthal on this show last week saying exactly what you just said in very forceful terms. Here he is.
Well, the Biden administration could end the occupation of Palestine tomorrow. They could have a Palestinian state while we're doing this live stream. All they have to do is say no more spare parts for your F-16s, no more F-35s, and it's over. Because Israel its occupation depends entirely on its direct line to Washington. And Biden won't do that. And Tony Blinken won't do that because Tony Blinken comes from a long line of Israel lobbyists.
So the United States government is absolutely complicit in the slaughter of innocent civilians in Gaza.
Yeah, and that's going to haunt us. That we are reaching a stage in which countries like Jordan, Saudi Arabia, Egypt, and Turkey that in the past were willing to give us a pass and tacitly support Israel, they're no longer going to do that. And it's going to leave Israel isolated in a way that's going to be very dangerous for Israel, may very well threaten its ability to exist. This is we're dealing with something that is a watershed moment, and it is imperative on the United States to try to talk some sanity to Israel. Like if you're dealing with a family member who's a drug addict, who's on the downward slope, you intervene to save them. We need to intervene to save Israel from itself. If we do not, I think Israel is facing its own destruction.
Larry Johnson, a pleasure, my dear friend. Good luck with your stay in Moscow. And I hope we can catch up with you at the end of the week before you leave to do our intelligence roundtable with that youngster McGovern.
Thanks, Judge.
Okay. Thank you, Larry. All the best. Judge Napolitano for Judging Freedom.